Welcome, everyone. I'm Steven Beschloss. Not before the years of Donald Trump did I think that lying was a critical component explaining the fractures and failures in our politics and society. No one matches Trump in his endless and discernible lying day after day, virtually every time he speaks. We've seen it most recently by his blaming the obvious failures to fix the Lincoln reflecting pool on vandals. This lying is so dangerous because it breaks people's trust and degrades our capacity to know what's true and what's false. Clearly, Andrew Weissmann agrees that such lying has endangered our democracy. In fact, he calls it a crisis, and he's penned a new book, Liar's Kingdom: How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America, which has reached #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. I'm frankly someone who's viscerally appalled by lying and liars, which is why I'm excited to be talking to Andrew, who thinks deeply about these issues. You'll likely know him as a legal analyst for MS Now, co-host of the legal podcast Main Justice, an NYU law professor, and as a lead prosecutor for special counsel Robert Mueller. So with that, let's get started. Lying is a topic that doesn't get enough attention, Andrew. So I'm extremely grateful for your new book, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
It's great to be here.
Thanks so much. So let's jump in.
Yep.
First question: you've chosen lying as the book's focus, a more than worthy choice given the pathological frequency and intensity of the lies that pour forth from Donald Trump. Of course, lately that includes his lies about the Iran war and the negotiations, how vandals are responsible for the reflecting pool's failures, and of course his ongoing lies about election fraud. This is just a slice of all the ongoing collection of lies. It's been a common belief throughout our history that politicians lie, right? But do you see the line of Trump as singular and unprecedented, both in its scale and its danger to our democracy?
I do. There is no question that he is not unique in somebody who is running for office or in office who is saying things that are not just stretching the truth, but are knowingly, intentionally false. He is not the first, and sadly, because of his success, he will not be the last, and that people will emulate him because he's been successful. And probably the least original part of my book is talking about the current media environment and how much that undermines one of the ways that we had previously, for about 100 years, justified not doing anything about these lies, saying, well, the remedy for false speech is true speech, because they all confront each other, and that friction will happen and people will see it, and that they will have to wrestle with that. And for a variety of reasons, that's just no longer the case, including people are in media bubbles, and they just, because of algorithms, they will just hear what they want to hear unless they take affirmative steps to really confront themselves with opposing viewpoints. And I really was thinking about an anomaly in my life where I was just thinking, and I was a prosecutor for 21 years, and I thought about, isn't it just so strange that we prosecute people for lying in all sorts of contexts, and even civil context? There's liability for defamation, lying about a person. But I just thought about Enron. I thought about Roger Stone lying to Congress, Paul Manafort admitting he lied to banks, to FBI agents, to all sorts of people, and that we take all sorts of action in those realms, but we do not do it with politicians. And that was sort of the start of my exploration and thinking about this subject.
Right. And I will say, I want to get into sort of the legal issues that you describe. And I think one of the things that's important is that you don't just diagnose the problem. You take the time to sort of help us to think through actually how do we respond to it, and that's
Right.
critical. I will say, as a side note, according to too many in the legacy media, the problem, of course, has been that they treated, especially in the first term, the traditional idea of not taking, not saying lies or lies, right? So there was always finding a way to soften it, falsehoods or claims, or, he said it, as if that was enough to then get away from the responsibility to call a lie a lie.
Absolutely. And that is something that we still find the media struggling with. And, in my world, one way to think about this, because I very much was steeped in and still am steeped in the criminal law. And there's sort of two aspects. One is something actually just false. In other words, leave aside the second component that I think about for criminal law, which is, was it intentionally false? But step one, which the media can say, is what you are saying is not true. That is not saying that you intentionally are lying. You could be making a mistake. You could be negligent. You could be reckless, but it's just not true. And I think the media does a really bad job of saying a person said X, but that is not true, as if there isn't some verifiable fact out there. We're not talking about an opinion, which is, do I think that the Constitution should protect a woman's right to choose? And there can be legitimate debate about that. That's opinion. So you can't just say that's just not true. But if it's like, is there gravity out there?
Yeah.
That
how
is
about
one.
this? If he says it's raining, we can go to the window and we can look.
Yes, exactly. And so this is one where you can say the reflecting pool, it costs taxpayer money, that the renovations did not work, that there's no evidence that did not work because of some vandalism as opposed to ineptitude. That's different than the second part, which is to say, and we are saying that you intentionally lied. Now, at some point, you can say you can't close your eyes to that. And it's worth remembering the legal standard for sending someone to jail for intentionally lying is beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not the standard in journalism or, frankly, in our own lives for what's the quantum of proof before you're going to say not just is it wrong, but is it a lie? So, because you're in a very different realm, you're not saying that this person should go to jail for the rest of their life or even any amount of time. So I think there's a lot of confusion within the mainstream media and not even mainstream media about sort of what their responsibility is in separating those two things out in terms of something just being false, and then also thinking about it, at some point it is intentional.
Right. So let's stay big picture for a moment. You share a quote at the beginning of the book from Hannah Arendt, a quote which includes this: "The sense by which we take our bearings in the world is being destroyed." That's strong stuff. How dangerous, how existential is lying by political leaders, Trump and others, not just for the functioning of democracy, but for society itself. And as sort of as a part of that, how worried are you?
I could not be more worried. What I am concerned about is, how do you run a country? How do you have a society that is functioning where fundamental facts, not disagreements about how to deal with those facts, but what actually is true, is there's world A and world B. This is where Donald Trump and others, but let's just stay with Donald Trump, has gotten away with this so that he can say, let's assume the whole reflecting pool fiasco is a big fat lie, that this was, to me, the reflecting pool is such a microcosm of everything that's wrong with this. And in some ways it's perfect to call it a reflecting pool, because it is both worth reflecting about, but it is also a reflection of what we are dealing with. And you have Donald Trump, you have the graft, you have the ineptitude, and now you have the lying about it. and that is saying that, oh, I'm just going to say that it's not me that caused the problem. It's not that I claimed I was a very good builder, that I can fix everything. And so now that it didn't work, I'm going to say it's vandalism that did it.
Right.
I'm actually going to also, it's a reflection of his vindictiveness, because it's like people who actually were picking the broken shards of the bottom of the pool, by all accounts, that they were picking it up. That's not a crime. But he's like, no. The only reason it didn't work is that they committed this vandalism, and that's the reason. It's not me, it's you. And the idea that he can just say whatever it is and you will believe it, and that is such a microcosm. And the example I take in the book is obviously the big lie, which is that there was material fraud in the 2020 election. Right. And the polling on that is that 2/3 of Republicans believe it.
Right.
So
right.
if you want to know how serious it is, if you want to know how serious it is, that statistic tells you how fundamentally we have to worry about the pernicious and pervasive effect of lies.
Yeah, and one of the, I think, particular dangers that the reflecting pool points out is that not only does he then turn it to blaming others, blaming vandals, now he puts a lot of people's lives in danger. He's now damaging the lives of a lot of people in the process in very concrete ways, who've been arrested for no good reason.
Absolutely. And that is one where they are just the latest in that category.
We know there'll be more.
Well, there will be more, and there are people who are currently subject to that vindictive prosecution. Abrego Garcia, most notably, he is the immigrant who was illegally extracted from this country and sent to a prison in El Salvador. And then when he was forced to be brought back with the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court finding that his rights were violated 9-0. 9-0. When have you ever seen this Supreme Court agree on that? And then he was criminally charged when he was brought back. Todd Blanche, according to the federal judge, was instrumental in doing that. And the federal judge found that it was a vindictive prosecution being brought to punish him for asserting his rights, and very much laid blame at Todd Blanche. The reason I keep on raising that is because, as I think everyone who is listening to this knows, Todd Blanche is coming up for his confirmation hearing, and I want to make sure people understand who he is.
Yeah. So let me move on. It's question number 3. You provide an example of a company like Enron and its CEO Ken Lay being held criminally accountable by comparing the public statements that he made with the actual data to prove fraud, that he knowingly and intentionally told a material lie. You also make the point that it's a crime to lie to shareholders. It's a crime to lie to Congress, to a jury, to a federal agent, but not to lie to the public. Why has there been no civil or criminal law to impose sanctions on political lies, such as Trump's egregious and still dangerous lie of election fraud in the 2020 election?
So I trace that problem, and I try and do it in a way that it's really for lay audiences. Like, you don't have to be a lawyer, let alone an election lawyer. So a very famous Supreme Court Justice, Oliver Wendell Holmes, had the view, which became known as the marketplace of ideas, and that the state isn't going to be deciding this is true and that's false, that it all comes out in this marketplace of ideas. And that's where you get this idea that the antidote to false speech is true speech. And you still hear Supreme Court justices say that from time to time. And I sort of trace the history briefly about that.
Right.
That idea really only applies and came up in the context of opinions, not factual matters.
Right.
But it ended up getting applied broader than when in sort of how it started. That's sort of one of the things, if you're a lawyer, that happens a lot. Like a case starts in one way and it sort of ends up spilling over and having unintentional consequences.
Misused, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. And the Supreme Court most recently has said there is no First Amendment protection for false speech. So committing a fraud, if you say, you're in a bank and you say, give me all your money, I'm holding it up, like that's speech, but it's speech is part of a crime. If you lie to Congress, that is speech, but it is considered fraudulent and it's not itself protected. Now, to be fair, false political speech to have that be subject to either civil or criminal regulation has downsides. I'm enough of a lawyer that I address the pluses and minuses, but it's really been carved out. I think there is both this history as to the limitations, but also it's worth remembering that who makes our laws? Our laws are made by politicians. So, you can understand them going, let's see, do I want the law to apply to me that would make it a crime or to disqualify me if I were found to lie? You could see them saying, I don't want to do that. So, by the way, just in case people think that this is some far out idea, one of the things I do is I look overseas to see what do other countries do. I've looked at what do states do here. And there are really good examples of countries that deal with this problem.
And that's exactly where I'm going with my next question. You provide examples.
What are we up to? Are we up to 4?
Number 4. You
okay.
Provide examples from France, from Brazil, from Germany to address lies, to, as you put it, shore up their systems against demagogues who would seek to use lies to destroy democracy. That includes the German law denying certain speech about the Holocaust. You made the point that the German law is protecting, quote unquote, public safety rather than private property. This says something important about their values. So what will it take for Americans to acknowledge that this industrial scale lying is a matter of public safety?
So I think one of the things that we can do is, let me just give you an example of what England has done and then some good news out of California. So England has a law, and the reason I'm picking England is that people listening to this are going to be thinking, okay, we're not looking at some, fly-by-night country or what the president would denigrate as countries that are not worthy of our looking at them, and I'm not going to repeat his language. So England, obviously, we come from an English legal tradition. They have a law that if you are found, after due process is accorded, to have lied about your political opponent, you are barred from holding that office. And the last time it was applied, it was to somebody who lied about their political opponent. And by the person who found to have lied won. And the court said, you cannot sit because you did that. In New York, which is where I'm from, and in Better New Yorker, if you are found to, after, again, due process, to committed any felony when you are a public official, you are automatically out of office because it's considered so antithetical under New York law to what it means to be a public official. California, according to Gavin Newsom, who tweeted about this, he just signed into law a statute that said that if you lie about ballots with the intent to undermine ballot access and ballot counting, that is a crime. And so the answer to your question is, where do I see potential movement here? At the state level. The state can regulate their own elections. They can have their own rules. It's, famously, the states are viewed as the laboratory of democracy. And that's where I see there can be real potential movement. Obviously, the current Congress, they can't seem to do much of anything. And so that's not going to happen now. But it also isn't going to happen unless people want it and react to it. And, this is one where, we still have the power of the vote as much as it's being challenged. So that I'm not sanguine that at the federal level it's going to happen anytime soon, but I really
Right, and
wanted
you're
people
reluctant
to
to
think about
talk about constitutional amendments just because that's such an enormous, bar to
it.
get across.
I wanted to try and figure out things that could work and work now. That one of the things I say at the end is I am all for more civics education, but I do not really want to hear from people saying that we have to do that, because it's true. Of course it's true, but it's not solving for an immediate problem. I think
Mm.
my analogy was, the Titanic hits an iceberg and the captain says, you know what, I think we really have to invest in greater research on radar. That is true, but not the time and place.
I confess that I'm frequently talking about the need for better education, ultimately a more informed electorate, but that's
You're
a
right. Of
long-term
course,
challenge.
you're right. Yeah, I mean, you are right. It's just that is I think that it's important. This reminds me a lot of times when I was the general counsel of the FBI, I definitely thought about what do agents and the analysts need now? What is the immediate concern, and what are sort of midterm and sort of long-term projects,
Right.
and sort of divided things that I was doing into those buckets.
But I want to stick for 1 second on this question of the values that underlie all of this. Again, sort of in the German context, they talk about it in terms of public safety, versus the more traditional approach for Americans, which is private property. I mean, is that the kind of shift, focus on the reason why these changes are needed? Because it's endangering people, it's endangering the society. Is that something that we're capable of getting to?
I do think it's endangering society. In the German context, there also was a concern about the undermining of human dignity and the personhood in the specific law they were dealing with there, which you referenced, which is the denial of the Holocaust. I do think we can get there, where it seems like we're obviously a long way away from that.
Yeah.
And the idea of, as John F. Kennedy said, ask not what what your country can do for you, but this, which is to me just seems like the total Trump ethos, which is very, very selfish and sort of like, what am I getting out of it? Which, by the way, of course, people are entitled to that, or to think about what is the country doing to make my lives better. But the other flip side of that is, the tens of thousands of people who in the military and public service every day, whether here, overseas, who are doing things for the country. And the idea of acting out of principle and of patriotism is one where there are so many people who are doing that, but it is not the mainstream that has sort of captured the attention of our political world and our mainstream media.
Yeah, well, to suffice to say, there needs to be a lot of shift in public consciousness before we get to that point where where values about our well-being end up being the focal point for our national leaders. So, a lot of the focus that you provide in the book really is about zeroing in on election fraud. That is a particular crisis that endangers our election process and election results. You've made the point that it's important that politicians, that the laws don't infringe on free speech, but you cannot lie if you want to run for federal office. That's sort of your suggestion. If you want to run for federal office, then you can't lie. So why is it critical to deny politicians the freedom to lie if they want to hold federal office?
So this is one where it's to me, in some ways it seems just so obvious, which is if anyone listening to this takes medication, there is a truth in advertising in terms of what's going to be on that label. And they can't just say, oh, by the way, I know that this is heart medication, but it also will make you younger and slimmer. and you get in a ton of trouble civilly and criminally if you violate those rules. And the idea that in an area that is so fundamental to our democracy, and ways that we can see now, to your point, we can see how much it is undermining our democracy. The idea that we're not holding politicians who, for God's sakes, they owe us that. Remember when I worked in the government, I worked for the public. That is, you take an oath of office to the public. And so the idea that you are not held to not just the same, but a lower standard than corporate executives, to people who are advertising, to if you testify before Congress, and all of those things are severely regulated. But if you're talking about, can Congress lie to us, as opposed to when we can't lie to them, but they can lie to us, and there's no consequence to them legally. To me, obviously this is a value judgment, but I sort of, in this book, I'm trying to make the case for we should not be accepting that's EXC, like accepting ACC and accepting them from the laws that we apply in so many other contexts.
Yeah, and I said it in my opening. I mean, I have a virulent intolerance for liars and lying. I mean, I just do. And I think, every kid is brought up in a world where they're told by their parents, you shouldn't lie. And we've come to accept that, that politicians are somehow different. And well, we've seen how that's been taken to the absolute endpoint in the current regime. The sixth question, let me share the summary of of the problem, which comes from your conclusion, which you describe as a quote unquote toxic stew. Here's the quote: "Our system of government built on checks and balances has faltered in the face of a political culture increasingly indifferent to truth and with no functioning forum to separate fiction from fact. Combine this with the balkanization of news, the rise of Silicon Valley robber barons wielding algorithms that skew our impressions of reality, and the hegemony of an executive power over the other branches of government." So my question, will it take the exit of Trump and a genuinely ethical and honest president to begin to overcome the crisis? And given the systemic scale of the problem, are you optimistic that it can be fixed in our lifetimes?
So am I optimistic that it can be fixed in our lifetimes? I don't know the answer to that. There are many, many disadvantages of aging, and I'll tell you one of the advantages, which is in whatever remaining time that I have here, that's what I'm going to be trying to do. Thank you. As I keep saying to my nephew, is like, I don't know how we screwed this up that badly. But the idea of leaving the country in this state to the next generation of that is so fundamentally upsetting that it's like, this is what I want to do with my time. And I don't think I'm in any way unique to that. I'm fortunate to have an ability. I teach. I do work for MS Now, so I have the ability to speak about it. I have this wonderful podcast host, Mary McCord, we on Main Justice, so we have the ability to try and translate what's going on legally to a lay audience. And I think that it is going to take everyone to have a concerted effort. I mean, I don't think people are going to be able to rest on their laurels. And if there's one thing I would want people to take from this book, even if you think this isn't the solution, it's to be thinking about the fact that when we get past this Trump presidency, is not to be thinking, oh, it's behind us. We've now seen that movie. We have seen the Biden administration, and I'm not here to criticize the Biden administration. It's that you cannot put your head in the sand and think that this is going to self-repair. We're at the 250th anniversary of this country, and people have to be thinking about bold, important reforms because the checks and balances that the framers put in place, we can see how they do not work. And that's, again, not faulting them. It's like we can see at this period, 250 years later, where there are fissures and where somebody like a Donald Trump, which is going to happen again and again, even if it's not somebody who doesn't have the exact same, whatever it is, magic sauce or however you want to describe it. But they're going to be people who are emulating him because he was successful. And so we have to be able to think our way out of this in terms of structural reform, whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's DOJ, whether we have more institutions like the Federal Reserve. I mean, you could go on, and I wanted to start the conversation on something I cared about, which is the political lies and a way that I could see us moving forward, either at the federal or state level.
Well, there's no normal to return to, and the opportunity for institutional changes become critical. I do think about, who followed Richard Nixon? Well, Jimmy Carter. What was Jimmy Carter promising? He was promising, he wouldn't lie. That the country needed that. So I'm at least hoping that part of the movement forward is an ethical and honest person in the White House, and ethical and honest people being elected to public office, where public servants understand their responsibilities to the public, which obviously we've gotten away from. But part of it is obviously to have the structures in place that help to offset that, which is why, again, everyone should read Liar's Kingdom, because you really do provide specific responses, specific ways to address it. So I really appreciate that. Before I let you go, I have one more thing, 6 more questions, a lightning round.
Okay.
And these 6 questions you can answer in 1 word, you can answer in a sentence or so, but we'll be fast.
Okay.
What makes you happy?
Oh, there's a lot, but I'll just say I have a great dog, Innes, so my English Cocker Spaniel.
What makes you angriest?
This is going to sound very abstract, but injustice. And I can give a slightly people who are in the Department of Justice who know better. Makes me extremely disappointed. Is not even. Doesn't even begin, because I just how much they are hurting that institution and what they owe the public.
What is your favorite word?
Oh, wow, that's great. Kindness.
Mm-hmm. What living person do you most admire?
This is going to be sappy. My sister.
Do you want to say in a sentence why?
She is an oncologist. She's incredibly caring. I think she's just it's a wonderful way to spend your life. And she has lived a very fearless life.
What historical person do you most admire?
Oh, wow, these are great questions. I think Martin Luther King Jr., just in what he accomplished, the dignity in which he did it, what he had to overcome, and the role model he set, maybe not always, his personal life, but in terms of how he conducted himself in the face of enormous adversity. And ways in which he took the high road, but was effective.
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? This is where I'm a trial lawyer at heart, and I've done lots of trials, and I have enormous faith in the jury system, and because of that, I know it's not a scientific experiment where it's a huge amount of data, but I think that Americans sitting on juries act out of principle and rise to the occasion and have common sense, and more than that, have decency. And so that to me is a bit of a North Star when I think about and am hopeful for the future. If I can give one quick second answer, I will say I feel the same way about the students I teach. I teach at NYU Law School. I'm sure it's true of around the country at law schools and other institutions, but it is invigorating to see the intelligence, the wisdom, the commitment of young people. And it, as somebody who's not young, it is just so inspiring, and again makes you feel hopeful about what they can do, which we managed to screw up.
Yeah. So Andrew, you're working on it. So to find a way to fix this. So thanks for the book. Thanks for your conversation. Let's just keep up the good fight. That's all we can do, right?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.